I first met you in the LGBT Alliance conference, and you were a bundle of colour. I remember you had a rainbow-coloured cane, and you were just full of energy.
The more attention you pay to this dysphoric framework, the bigger it grows, the bigger it gets. So the more attention you pay to your feelings of discomfort, the more they expand. Please don't fuck your endocrine system up. Just don't. Please don't. It will give you no end of grief. Please don't do it. I'm not going to stop showing these because I was going to have them cut off. If I want to take the twins for a walk, they're going for a walk with me. So like Pinky and Perky are staying. I'm sorry about it. It's not actually about intellect with this. It's about vulnerability and grooming. And it doesn't matter how intelligent you are. If anything, your intelligence can work against you with this, because if you then have something that's, been emotionally weaseled into you, then your rationality, your intellect will then create a firewall around that idea because you want to protect it emotionally.
I met you in London and I was so jealous of your makeup skills and you did promise to give me makeup application classes next time we get together.
100%.
You look amazing, but
that's
great. I look forward to it.
So, hello, Victoria. I first met you in the LGBT Alliance conference a few years ago. I think 2 years, maybe 3 years ago. Yeah. And you were a bundle of colour. I remember you had a rainbow-coloured cane and you were just full of energy.
Yeah.
And full of life. And I was like, who is this person? And we didn't speak for long, but you made a lasting impression on me. And so I'm delighted to have you here on our podcast. Really delighted. So you're very welcome.
Thank you for having me. And yeah, it's a real honor to be here. And thank you so much for the work you're doing. And Mia as well, thank you so much for the work you're doing. I think, you've been so important to this movement. I don't think it would be, the same without you. Thank you so much. I really appreciate it.
That's lovely.
So
and
tell
thank
us about you. Yeah, tell us about you and bring us back.
Okay. So I identified as trans for about 10 years. And that started off as me, being identifying as gender fluid, I would say. And so I started off being like the usual artsy weird kid who gets sucked into this stuff. And, I had loads of problems growing up in terms of, being bullied and being, again, weird artsy person, and also having eating disorders and things like that. And so I basically had, if you had this person is going to be trans bingo card, I basically filled in every single slot. And this kind of happened when I was on Facebook and Instagram, and the gay culture had already been queered. So I knew I wasn't straight. And so I was in kind of the gay scene, which was already being queered. And there wasn't really much talk about sexuality. It was more about gender. And so everyone was talking about, you could be gender fluid, you could be gender flux, you could be gender fuck, and all of this sort of stuff. And I went, I guess I'm just gender fluid then, because I don't really, identify as, a woman, even though I'm female and I know I'm female. I have a disconnect with my body, and so I'm a bit exuberant with my clothing. Okay, cool. This label is great. Fabulous. However, the more attention you pay to this dysphoric framework, the bigger it grows, the bigger it gets. So the more attention you pay to your feelings of discomfort, the more they expand. And so it went from gender fluid to non-binary to non-binary trans mask to, I am a trans man. And at the end of all of this, I was actually being groomed by a trans-identified male, and I can get into that later. But it got to the point where I was going to the doctor to try and get to the gender clinic, and actually they were just putting me off, going, we think that's that's something to talk about for another time. How's your back? That kind of thing. So they were casually trying to put me off, and I couldn't get to the gender clinic. So I ended up, being someone.
Can I ask? Sorry, you said I couldn't get to the gender clinic. Does that mean you couldn't get an appointment because of waiting lists, or am I missing something?
Oh yeah, cool. So I was basically, there was this weird loophole that was happening. So I'm not quite sure how it occurred. So I asked the doctor about it and they said, okay, we'll do a referral, and then nothing happened. And then I was told I could self-refer. And then when I called up, I was told I needed a referral. And it got to the point I was so frustrated, I just started looking online. So no one could give me a straight answer. I still don't know why. I don't know if it's because NHS privatization and the sisters being terrible or something. But I just couldn't get an appointment or a referral. And so I'm like, okay, fine. I will just look online. And if you're intelligent and curious and vulnerable, there are an infinite number of ways to totally fuck yourself up, which you can find online, frankly. And that's what happened to me. So I found the concept of home brewing, and that is essentially a biohacking community who identify as trans, who make their own hormones and endocrine disrupting stacks at home. And that's basically what happened to me. So I purchased things off of the internet. I'm not going to go into what they are because I'm terrified someone's going to see this and copy me. Please don't. Please, I'm just saying now, public service announcement, please don't fuck your endocrine system up. It's just don't. Please don't. It will give you no end of grief. Please don't do it. So I ended up buying some.
Do you get the impression that many are?
Yeah. So there's, tens of thousands in these communities. And they will make their own creams at home, estrogen creams, testosterone creams, pills, things like that. You can order pills off the internet. You can get estrogen cream online as well. You can order hormones online. It's very, very easy to obtain them. But I went the home brewing route because I'm going, I could control the amount of, I basically took something that encourages my body to make its own testosterone, and I gave myself stage 3 polycystic ovarian syndrome. And now my voice has lowered. I have osteoarthritis. I have lots of other medical conditions that I most likely would not have if I hadn't gone this route. It is dangerous. I cannot stress how dangerous it is to screw up your endocrine system. Just, I most of my money now goes on medication and trying to keep myself actually out of bed. So I'm on about 50 pills a day. I'm on hormone replacement therapy because I haven't produced enough estrogen probably for the last possibly 5 or 10 years. I am having constant trouble with the absorption rate of my hormones. The NHS are not providing for any of this. There is no real framework for detransitioners. Nothing. So
just to be clear, you always self-medicated. You never actually made it to the Tavistock or to any gender clinic.
Correct. And I want to tell people that it's just as dangerous, if not more dangerous, to do things online. You don't know what's in these drugs. It could be lead, arsenic, cadmium. You don't know the fillers and the binders that are in this stuff. You don't know. It could be rat poison. You've no idea. And the thing is, if you get to the point where you're that desperate, then the thing you need really is proper investigative mental health help. You don't need to be taking some random pills off the internet. You just don't.
And were you actually convinced that you were a man when you were doing this?
Okay.
Did you really think you were a man?
I don't believe that I was biologically male. I felt an intense discomfort with my sexed body as a result of everything I'd been through, and possibly some biological factors, which I want to go into later. And I felt that I would be far happier as functioning in society as passing as male. That's how I.
And can I ask? You mentioned something about a trans-identified male influencing you.
This was late stage of me identifying as trans, and I basically met the boss level trans-identified male. So the AGP that every single TERF will tell you exists, imagine that on steroids. And that's what I was encountering for about a year.
Oh my God.
And I was one phone call away from taking black market testosterone. They had influenced the fetish scene. They were essentially incredibly powerful and basically untouchable. But because of the culture of fear around them, no one would say anything about their behavior. And so they were saying things to me like, you're a trans man, honey, you're a trans man, honey. I can tell you these things. You need to get on hormones. And there was always, oh no, you're totally valid as a man. I see you as a man. They didn't see me as a man. They would, quote unquote, misgender me all the time. It's pretty fucking obvious I'm not one. And, I have two very prominent things that mean I'm not a man. So I just, and I also, by the way, I'm not going to stop showing these because I was going to have them cut off. If I want to take the twins for a walk, they're going for a walk with me. So like Pinky and Perky are staying. I'm sorry about it. Yeah, basically, they were pushing and pushing and pushing for me to fully transition. And this person was also systematically, psychologically torturing and abusing me and breaking me down because their fetish was to see women broken. And the stuff I have seen, which this person was getting off to, I never, ever want to see again. Ever.
You said something to me before. You said, the fetish scene, the BDSM scene, you said it seems to be, infiltrated by a lot of bad faith people who are really like have fetishes, things like I like to humiliate and see and break people. That's a fetish in itself.
Yes, the fetish is called mind break, and it's about psychologically torturing a woman until she loses her mind. It's as bad as it sounds. And I'm not going to say again, every single person in the fetish scene is an evil, bad perpetrator. There are some people who've skirted in, encountered a little bit, gone away, and they don't know about what happens in the fetish scene and how dark it can get. They're not going to know. But the people who run the show, the predatory men who frequent these scenes, there's no safeguards. So it used to be, back in 2010, when some of my former friends were kind of going to that kind of stuff, there was codes of conduct. You can disagree with the fetish scene, it's fine. I mean, I'm not in it anymore because I think it is so predatory and so bad for women, and women have died. I genuinely do not see that the commercial fetish scene can have... the way it is, I can't see any redeeming qualities at all. I think it's dangerous. So there used to be codes of conduct. There used to be, you don't do a scene, which is when you're acting out a fetish. You don't do a scene when you're drunk. You don't do a scene when you're high. You don't do a scene when you're on drugs. If someone looks like they're dissociating, you stop and you check in with them. You make sure you do aftercare. So if a scene happens and then it's really intense, then you give them hugs afterwards. You reassure them. You make sure they're okay. You give them a cup of tea, whatever, right? So that's how it used to be. And that, again, we can still say, there was stuff going on which was clearly unfavorable. That's all gone. There's drugs on the floor. They'll just pick, literally the security guards, if there's drugs on the floor, they'll just pick them up and snort them. There'll just be bags of them. And then the predators get into the position of dungeon monitor, which are meant to be community leaders or community pillars, who are in positions of power in these particular areas. They will get into these particular areas and then just watch women get raped. They don't intervene. And then the women who are being preyed on, if they then become dungeon monitors, because they have a reputation in the scene, they don't stop it because they're too scared. So there's this illusion, this theater of safety, oh, we have security, oh, we have dungeon monitors, oh, we have CCTV. I was publicly raped. They wiped the footage. They didn't talk to the police. To my knowledge, they didn't talk to the police. The footage was gone. So
is this... Okay, in my innocence, I know nothing about any of this. Is this some kind of big industry that I'm totally unaware of?
Yes.
There are how many locations are we talking? Worldwide. I assume we're talking London.
Worldwide.
Huh?
You have Japan, you have Berlin, London. I think now there's Brazil. I need to double check that though. But and it's not just one. There's there's an industry. and then, and I know I'm going to get shit for talking about it, but so there's that. There's also other clubs that go across the world. There's also local clubs. There's also it's like it's freaking everywhere. You will, if you go on any kind of I think there was Fetish Map London. You go on there. There's not just shops. There's also clubs. There's there was FetLife, which I think is again dangerous. There was actually rape training manuals being disseminated on FetLife, I think. And that
wait. So this is legal? Is it legal? And is it? I assume it sounds unregulated.
The police don't intervene because they think, oh well, it's consensual. I actually think with the whole gender identity stuff and trans washing, there's also been kink washing because it serves the predatory AGPs, and so they go, oh, my kink isn't your kink, but don't go on. Sorry, Stella.
Yeah. Could I come in on that? I think it's the great God of informed consent, that everything is about consent. If people consent, they're allowing extraordinarily inappropriate things happening.
Yeah.
There was a murder in Ireland. A guy, he was an architect, and he killed a woman who was very vulnerable. And honestly, the guy, this is about 10 years ago, but Graham Dwyer was his name, and we'll put it in the notes. But the guy, the woman, the very vulnerable woman, effectively, as far as I could reading through the lines, consented to the point of death, if you follow me, some sort of weird sex thing. She was very vulnerable. He was very sadistic. He's in prison now, but that's the great God of consent. This informed consent thing has spread, and it's a very, very poisonous kind of concept.
I agree, but I also think, sorry, I need to get this across. I'm sorry. There is no real or true informed consent in the BDSM scene because of the stuff that the guys will do to you when, say, for example, I don't know, you want to go into a scene and you agree to, I don't know, whipping or something like that. Let's keep it linear. You don't know what else is going to happen. If they like things like torture or interrogation or things like that, you don't know what's going to happen in the scene. And there are people that get off on the fact that it's like, oh, you've given ongoing consent, where anything can happen, and say, oh, well, it's fine. It's like the scene is self-policing. You can withdraw your consent at any time. You really think a vulnerable autistic woman who's gone into a fetish club the first time is going to say no to like some big hulking man who's trying to get one over on her? She's going to be terrified.
So by walking in, by entering, you're consenting. That's it? That's what they think? They can do whatever?
I think the sadistic men think that, and there's a lot of them, and they group together. But the kink washing side of things is, oh, you need to ask to be invited into a scene, and you have the right to say no, and you have the right to withdraw consent at any time, and the scene is self-policing. And the reality is, it's just sexual assault and torture.
And you said to me two things that I'm interested in hearing your thoughts about. One was that there was a disproportionately high number of autistic people in this scene. And the second was that a disproportionately high number of trans has really kind of been infiltrated or vice versa in this scene.
Yes. So, I mean, it's a perfect breeding ground for predatory AGPs because anything you do can be carded into a kink. So if you say, oh, like if you're in like I don't know, say a shopping mall and you're saying, I would like to beat someone's body until half of it is black, someone is going to go, Jesus suffering fuck, you're a bad human being. However, if you go in and go, oh, my kink is sadism, oh, that's fine. Fill your boots, that's fine. Don't yuck somebody else's yum. It's cult-like now, and it's protectionist. So they will protect their own. So if anyone speaks out about the scene, there's the scene, and they will just, even the people who've been abused are trauma bonded enough that for the most part, unless they're out, they won't speak to kind of outsiders generally about the scene. And also there is a link as well between people who are either high IQ or high up in professional status and people who frequent the fetish scene as well. So you will get judges, you will get solicitors, you will get, so the people who make the laws, they go in there as well. So, there's a correlate there. I do think in terms of the human condition, there is there's going to be something along the lines of complexity theory where you can be a novelty driven individual, and when because we have very complex brains, something will be crosswired and something occasionally will go wrong, and so you can get novelty driven individuals. But the problem is, instead of having a society where you can have a healthy sexuality, which may be slightly novel, all you've got is the framing of the predatory fetish scene. And that is so dangerous. There's no discourse on, no mainstream discourse on what could genuinely be a healthy sexuality without the need for, I think if there is a sadism driver where you need to dominate someone, you need to subjugate someone, you need to abuse somebody, that is de facto, it cannot be a healthy sexuality, because your so-called kink, your so-called sexuality is predicated on abusing other people. And the scene excuses that. The scene sticks to their own.
And tell us yourself. So you kind of came in, got into that scene where you kind of identified as trans, fell into this extraordinarily abusive, cloaked under we're kink kind of scene. And what happened then?
How did you find yourself in there? Have we covered that?
No, we haven't. So the goth and the fetish scene join up at the back. So, and also there's a subtype of goth called fetish goth, which kind of wears all the PVC and things like that, and or latex, and then also goes dancing. And I don't have a problem with self-expression and dancing. I have a problem with, oh, you're in the goth scene. Oh, by the way, on next weekend, I've just made friends with this person that's Limelight. Would you like to come along? And then that's how you get dragged in. And I'm not going to say every single person in the fetish scene is going to be, a casualty. I cannot make that judgment. I can say, and also I know some people, like there are, artists and performers in insecure housing in London, and they will do these gigs like £50, £100, because, they're the only ones who are really employing them. And I know, for example, there's some who have been, their rapists, for example, aren't, what's the word? So they're not blacklisted from the club. There are some people who just like it for the clothes and the music, but now you've got the society of the spectacle, you have the formation of an aesthetic identity, and then you've got that mixed in with the fetish scene, because AGP and fetish go hand in hand, and goth and fetish now go hand in hand because of the spectacle. I think it, like, a few years ago it still did, but now it's totally enmeshed. So wow. I was in and out of the fetish scene probably again for a decade, so it coincided with my trans identity, and I was groomed into the fetish scene by my first abuser, and it was just, oh, this is just a fact of life. I do this, you're coming too, and there's no, and if at the time if I had been asked to speak about it at that time, I would have said I volunteered to go in. I mean, I was still very curious, and I wanted to know about this stuff because I've always been naturally quite curious. And I think that's also how it gets you, where you're like, oh, I don't know anything about this, I want to find out. But if you go in and you're curious and you're vulnerable, you're fresh meat. It's that simple. If you are a curious and vulnerable woman, especially if you're autistic, especially if you're, there's some vulnerability about you, like, you're fresh meat. And the predatory guys will just descend on you. That's just how it is. And there's no safeguards. Whether it's, and there was a place I used to go where I remember I was chatting to a woman, and we were just talking about things we were quote unquote into at the time. And by the way, fetishes and kinks can be socially transmitted. I need to talk about that too. And so we were just talking, we were having a really nice conversation. And this guy who was, fashioning himself as a dom next to us was laughing about how he wanted to tie us up and super glue our mouths shut so we'd stop talking. Like, that kind of comment is normal in the fetish scene. Like, there's all about subjugation, all about shutting women up. And it's cloaked in false liberation. It's like, oh, the vanillas don't do this. Like, we're just so edgy. It's like, yeah. Death isn't edgy. Like,
rape isn't edgy.
It's ridiculous.
Can I ask what do you think the link to autism is, though? Do you think that you said there was an overrepresentation of autistic people in there?
Yes,
Why?
men and women. Because autistic women have a tendency to have and pick up paraphilias. I wonder if that's to do with the brain masculinization hypothesis that Simon Baron-Cohen posited. I'm not entirely sure. I'd need to. It seems to tally, but I'm not entirely sure. But they have a tendency to be victims. They have a tendency to be impressionable and then groomed by the guys. And also, the autistic men also have a tendency to have paraphilias. Male paraphilias and female paraphilias are extraordinarily different. And with the men, it's usually more aggressive and I want to do this to somebody rather than, say, for example, a woman going, wow, this texture really turns me on. Like, they are wildly different. So,
and just about the autistic point, could the autistic also be a sensory thing and also
yes,
a kind of discomfort around intimacy, and so they're kind of more comfortable with lack of intimacy sex, if you follow me?
well,
lack of intimate sex.
I mean, it's interesting. I think the fetish scene is more of like there's a lot of performance in it. I think, and so you get lots of different subtypes of people. You get voyeurs, you get exhibitionists, people who really like to make a scene. And for autism, I think it's to do with paraphilias. And also,
and just one other thing, anime is kind of exaggerated creatures, exaggerated emotions. It's very clear. It's the baddie, the goodie, if you follow me.
Yeah, it is.
And arguably with BDSM, it's straight like you have that role, you have that role.
Yeah.
These are the rules.
Yeah, I think that's I'd argue that's correct. And I think as well that's probably why you get autistic DOMs as well. So yeah, I do think you're right on that. I do think though there is
it's all speculative, but it's very interesting.
No, I think that's good inductive reasoning. I think you're right.
Could you give me what are the female paraphilias that you're talking about? Female fetishes.
Yeah, so for example, you get leather dykes, so they just like leather, and it's like and so but there's like leather dykes are kind of a different. So the leather dykes that are TRA will welcome trans-identified males into their spaces. So you also get, it's really interesting, like there needs to be an entire anthropological study on the fetish scene because you also get turf leather dykes who really hate the fact that trans-identified males are in their space. So it's like there needs to be field notes. People
did they collide? Do those two communities of leather dykes, do they ever collide in real life?
I think we just avoid each other.
Do you like that?
No.
Yeah.
So it's like we're not like those leather dykes. Like it's a whole thing. Yeah. But you also get like the thing is as well, like with leather dykes, they are some who are really, really heavily into BDSM. And again, I wonder, I wonder as well because there's a lot of othering of female sexuality by society if you try and carve something out, you then have to be almost more extreme than the men to kind of feel like you belong somewhere. So it's like you're more extreme than them, you're away from them, and we're making our own kind of culture. So I wonder if it has something to do with that. And there's also the thing about...
Could I add to that, Victoria? Very often with BDSM and other kind of distresses and disorders in life, you can be replaying distress from an earlier part of your life.
100%.
And a lot of people who have autistic traits or autism have been bullied. Mm-hmm. And I could see how they might want to be bullied in their sex life as a way of replaying and trying to get some sort of sense.
Yeah. Like, there's a fetish and a kink for everything. So there is a bullying.
You're protesting.
Yeah. And also, I would argue, if you have been trauma bonded to a particular set of behaviors and pathways, I think reinforcing it actually makes it worse and not better.
Yeah. So
and also, there was a few studies on what happens to people during being on the receiving end of corporal punishment, like BDSM, and you dissociate. You're not even processing what's going on in your body. So this idea of using BDSM to heal, it's very prevalent in the fetish scene. And I actually think what's happening is just you're then trauma bonding to somebody else. And that person can then hurt you even more. Even if the person is attempting to do something right, because there are people in the scene who do genuinely care. I think there's far less of them than the predatory AGPs and the predators. But they can potentially say, oh, I'll try and help you get over XYZ, and then end up, through the repeating of these patterns actually making it worse. And also in terms of the dissociation that you feel, that can make it worse for you in your daily life. So if you're constantly dissociating, you're constantly humiliated, and you're constantly bullied or belittled. Like, I know women who've been in the scene who are now incapable of making decisions because their self-esteem has been shattered through all the stuff that's happened to them. So, and they're intelligent women. They have this vulnerability where they needed somewhere to belong. And then the people who are sadistic in the scene, who can be very good at hiding who they are. Like, they are very, very good social chameleons. Essentially, like, they have taken them in, pretended to be nice, and then just decimated these women. And the number of women I know who then, like, even mistresses who then identified as non-binary, because even they're dissociating from their body, because you still have to appeal to men. This whole idea of like, oh, if you're holding the whip as a woman, you're empowered. No, you have to be sexually attractive to your client, or they're not going to book you. So even they're starting to dissociate from their sex bodies and call themselves non-binary now.
And did you say it was socially contagious or something?
Yes.
Like, you felt it was...
Yeah, it's called getting into a kink. So so kinks are memes, right? They're ideas, not particularly good ones, but essentially, if you are introduced to something, it's just basic Pavlovian conditioning. Pavlov's dogs. So at the point of orgasm, if you are then introduced to a stimuli, or if there's been a stimuli during a sexual arousal, you can then get an arousal pattern to that particular thing. And then also there's social contagions with kinks, because there's so many people going, oh, well, I'm into this, I'm into that. And then the other person tries it, and then, oh, I'm into this now. And so you get kind of clusters of people who are into certain types of kink and going, oh, I like this kink, but these people over here, like, they like those types of kinks, so we don't talk to them. And, so some people are kind of very into, I guess, the colloquial term would be light slap and tickle, and some people into very, very severe BDSM. And so there's some, and also it's very easily transmissible for a vulnerable person to go from being curious about something to then being deep in it and not being able to find a way out. And we need to be aware, like, I would love to chat to Hakeem about the social contagion aspects. I don't think it's something that he's necessarily come across, because you won't necessarily come across it unless you've been in the scene for a long time. But people pick these kinks up, and you can also do it through voyeurism, or just through watching. So if someone's being caned in the middle of a, say for example, it's a dance floor and someone's being caned in the middle of a dance floor, then you may go, oh, I haven't seen that before, I want to try it. And then someone else will do it to you, and then another person will see it and do it to somebody else, and so on and so on and so on. So that
makes perfect sense.
Yeah.
That is behaviors, ideas, they are socially contagious. Like, have you heard, I read an article about, there was a young detransition man, and he was writing about rapid onset autogynephilia. And the article sticks in my mind. It was a Substack, and he was saying, that it's just, he used a really hilarious example. He said, imagine, you read a Reddit post about somebody who has sex with toasters, and you think to yourself, oh, I've never heard of anyone having sex with toasters. But then the idea is in your mind that people have sex with toasters, and eventually you get to the point where you also want to do that. It's basic social contagion, something that never would have occurred to you.
Yeah. Exactly.
Or you don't. I think I now don't. But there was something I was thinking of when you were saying that about the point of orgasm. A few clients that I've worked with have told me, male clients, that they're watching what would be considered vanilla porn or whatever, ordinary porn, for want of a better phrase. And then at the very last moment, at point of orgasm, the woman that they thought they were watching is kind of, turns out, has a penis, or turns out is a trans woman. Yeah. If you follow me. And when I first heard that, I thought, what? what? And then I learned a lot about testosterone and novelty and always looking for the novelty and the illicit.
Yeah.
And also then I realized that like the trans industry is so infiltrated into the porn industry. And now I'm hearing through you. So they're all very infiltrated. It just feels extraordinarily nefarious and purposeful. That's the word, purposeful.
Yes.
Why would they do it? It's just crazy.
I think it goes back to predatory AGPs. And it also goes back, we need to look at the driver of predatory AGP and also the driver of predatory male behavior, and that's sadism and domination. And they have a sadism drive. They have a drive for power and they have a drive for dominance. And it's the same with the people making really, really, really abusive porn. And that, by the way, incidentally, is how you can turn pro-social men into abusive antisocial men, because the antisocial men will prime through these things. Like, for example, Andrew Tate's done it as well, will prime through whether it's porn, whether it's predatory AGP or other manipulative behaviors and practices. They will groom the pro-social men into being antisocial. And we need to be looking at the sadism drivers, not just a basic kind of cultural idea of, what this abuse is or what trans is or what AGP is or what fetish is. We need to look further behind that and look at the sadism drive, because that's the thing we need to be tackling. And we also need to make sure that there are very strong social punishments for men who are sadistic to women. We don't have that. And so if guys are kind of pro-social and then, looking at these antisocial guys, they're not getting punished. And then they're, around a culture where they're being told, oh, abusing women is fine. Actually, they really like it, which is actually what some of the DOMs actually believe. They believe women are biologically completely inferior to men and enjoy being abused. Then that's going to turn those pro-social men antisocial and get them into bad practices. And we need to be examining that further. And I think if we don't, we're going to have a much longer and more brutal fight on our hands. I genuinely believe that. I know, it's food for thought, right? I feel like I've seen too much, but, I'm still here though, so it's okay.
What brought you towards detransition?
It was actually being publicly raped. And I was publicly raped by a trans-identified male, and I was very badly abused, and and they wanted to be treated as a woman, still wanted to keep their penis, had fake breasts, very like comically large fake breasts, and they behaved like a hyper predatory male. So their identity of what they were claiming to be versus what they actually were two enormously different things. And that disconnect and the abuse I was suffering is what snapped me out of it. And there's a part of me that's really upset at myself that it took something that catastrophic and seeing the coal face of predatory AGP was the thing that snapped me out of it. It took me that long. There's another part of me that realizes it's not actually about intellect with this. It's about vulnerability and grooming. And it doesn't matter how intelligent you are. If anything, your intelligence can work against you with this, because if you then have something that's, been emotionally weaseled into you, then your rationality, your intellect will then create a firewall around that idea because you want to protect it emotionally. And, I still have to tell myself that because, I know a lot of women who, they're not stupid people. I'm not a stupid person. But at the same time, these unique vulnerabilities mean they can fall prey to this. And that's what happened to me, because my bodily distress, my gender nonconformity, all of this stuff, that was never remedied properly, ever. I desperately looked for help. There was no help. There was no framework for help. There is still no framework for help. And it's even worse under the NHS now. And I really pity and worry about the the young women, like the younger women behind me, who are then desperate to get some kind of help or integrative therapy, and there's nothing there for them. So the NHS will give you 6 to 20 sessions, and you have to speak about one specific thing. And if you don't speak about one specific thing, you get discharged. So there are NHS practices who have discharged women after they tried killing themselves. That's how bad the state of care is now because of NHS privatization. How on earth are you meant to help anybody in that situation? There is no help for these women. And we don't just need talking therapy, I think. I think we need more integrative approaches. So one of the theories I have is that, especially if you're being exposed to this stuff during your formative years, I actually think people haven't looked hard enough at the cluster of bodily integrity disorders, but also what's the key thing that drives all of these, not just the social stuff, but there's parietal lobe dysfunction. If you're autistic or dissociative or think you have an extra limb and you want it removed, or you want a set of genitals that you don't have, that's parietal lobe dysfunction. So one way we could potentially look at creating treatments would be something like transcranial magnetic stimulation, because that helps for depression. So why can't we start looking at tailored therapies for that and, survey the results and actually start doing research in that way? Because that's one linchpin which just hasn't been remedied. There's a possibility that could even help for anorexia. So why aren't we looking at it?
Is there science to back this up? They've noticed. I don't know what area of the brain you're talking about, but
I've seen a few papers on parietal lobe dysfunction, because that's basically where, like, the basic thing is, your parietal lobe is where you kind of, like, I'll put it in really broad terms. So it's basically where your body map kind of is and how you relate to yourself. So if it's off kilter, you're just not going to feel integrated to your sense of self. I do think there's other things as well that can happen. And so, there's lots of things that can happen, but I do think that it's, I'll send you a few papers, but no research has been conducted specifically about this. And I think that this is something we could potentially look at as a promising treatment. So no one has used TMI for gender identity disorder, or whatever it's going to be called at this point or framed, but I think it should be. I think there's something there.
Interesting.
Yeah.
Can we talk about you and your color?
Sure.
How colorful you are?
And the rise of aesthetic policing. You said you're worried about people policing aesthetics.
Yeah, I am. And I spoke about this a little on Red Light Expose, and I'm now a co-host on Red Light Expose. So I talked about when I left kind of the trans ideology and kind of walked away. I lost absolutely everybody. When I say I was cancelled, I lost everyone. Like, I lost all of my friends, all of the people in the scene, all of the people in the alternative scene, not just the fetish scene. Like, barely anyone spoke to me. And so
because you detransitioned, or because you left the fetish scene, or were both at the same time?
Basically because A, I detransitioned, and B, they some of them sided with my rapist. And that's the problem as well. Like, I want to talk, actually, before we go on to the color stuff, I want to talk about the weaponization of empathy, because we haven't got that right either. Because it's not suicidal empathy and it's not weaponized empathy, it's empathy hijacking. So what's happened is that the predatory men with a sadism drive, know how to make someone feel sorry for them. So what they'll do is present as weak and feeble and victimized as possible, and then the women want to take care of them. And so that's how they then, through that empathy, push their ideas. And that's why they then so robustly defend them, because they have been emotionally reasoned into something they have not logically thought about. They've just wanted to take care of someone who looks as though they've been a victim. And any normal human who goes, wow, this person's been victimized, generally wants to take care of them. So it's not recognized empathy or suicidal empathy. It is empathy hijacking. So that's why people robustly defend trans ideology, even if they don't know anybody trans, or if they have like one person in their vicinity, or there's loads of different evidence. That, like, again, what I was talking earlier on about creating that firewall, that emotional reasoning has then been, there's a firewall of pseudo reason around that emotional belief. And so that's why they defend it, because they have an emotional, visceral reaction to someone they believe being victimized. So I think that's really important to cover, because I don't think anyone has spoken about that, and they may not have seen the sadism driver in action and how this actually occurs. And this occurs with every single malignant belief system. So whether that is with AGP, whether that's with radical Islamism, whether it's a psychopath who is trying to make everyone feel sorry for him, it's exactly the same thing. They will use exactly the same methodology to make you feel sorry for them, and then you've been emotionally reasoned into that belief, and then your intellectual firewall goes around that that emotional belief. It's formulaic.
Fascinating.
Yes. So, but now we can talk about aesthetic policing. So when I left the scene, when I detransitioned, I lost everybody. I started looking at kind of grassroots feminism, because what I'd been sold as feminism. So I did actually work, with ex-Muslims for I think 12, 13 years. And I knew about kind of the human rights abuses there. And that's kind of like the real kind of grassroots liberatory stuff. But everything else around me was very kind of sex work is work and this kind of stuff. And I'm going, don't think it is. Don't think you guys have the answers. So I then started going to places like Philia and, places like that, and, trying to join a few groups. And there are some people who totally get it. So in terms of like my aesthetics and things like that, they're like, oh, you just want to be yourself. You really enjoy color. You really enjoy life. Like literally, when I die, I'm going to get like in my will, there is going to be a mortician note going, here's how you do my makeup. It's going to be an open casket. Like full on, right? Because I just love it so much. And, so like I'm wedded to color and joy in life, because it does, like color, joy and life don't belong to any side. They belong to us, and we have a right to express ourselves. And it should just be normal to want to express yourself and experiment in a benevolent and groovy way. What's the problem? So I went to places like Philia, and I went to kind of other kind of Radford meetups, and the traditional 1970s reactionary radical feminism is you don't do makeup because makeup is patriarchal. And actually, the act of bodily adornment is 500,000 years old, and it doesn't actually belong to either sex. And we have a propensity to look at things that are bigger, bolder, and brighter than nature, because that's called a supernormal stimuli. So if you create something that is beyond nature and becomes supernature, then you're going to go, wow, that's really pretty, or oh my god, that's so bright, oh my god, I want to look at it. And that's the same as principles in art. So if you have a look at landscapes when they're meticulously done, or if they have a really bright blue, you're more drawn to them because they've made a supernormal stimuli of what the water looks like. So this aesthetic policing thing comes from almost a disgust-based reactionary feminism, where they think any mode of bodily adornment is patriarchal. And I think you have a right as a woman, if you're like, I don't want to do makeup, I don't want to beautify myself, I don't want to do this because I think the beauty industry is toxic. You have every right to do that. And if you want to go ahead and do that, that is your want to do. And I applaud you if that's what's going to make you happy and what you think that's what you need for the fight. But I have had people police me for my clothing. I've had one woman come up to me saying, oh, so you're a lesbian, are you? I'm like, yeah. Oh, why are you just like that then? And physically tugging at my clothing. So I've had that happen. And I've been called a traitor, so that's fun. And I have had, it got to the point where the policing resulted in a pile-on, I think 1,000-person pile-on on Twitter, because I said, well, I'm a lesbian who likes makeup, and I don't like regressive standards in the beauty industry, right? I like color. I like things that are giving me joy and supernormal stimuli. I don't care about looking a certain type of way because the men's like it. I couldn't give a shit. And I was trying to say, look, we've got this whole long lineage of adornment. Why are we throwing out the entire thing? Why aren't we looking at the systematic issues of the beauty industry? Why are we then morality policing women who are in the scene who look different to you? Like, why are we doing that? And And I was told it was a toxic lib fem argument, and then people were trashing my body painting work as well, and all of this other stuff I was doing, and it was horrible. And so this is a person as well that actually helped in a hostel. So I'd helped her get food and make sure she had a clean towel and helped her with the showers. And then she was just turning on me on Twitter for clout. And I've gone, holy shit, this sisterhood thing isn't actually real, is it? And actually, sisterhood is real when you find the right people who get you and you find the right people on your wavelength who you can work with. When that happens, it's utterly beautiful. But when it comes to this kind of aesthetic policing, it really does have parallels with the aesthetic policing of the female morality police in Iran, because all you're doing is policing somebody's appearance to the point where they feel restricted, dispossessed, dissociative, depressed. And I've seen women who want to come into liberatory grassroots feminism, seen the way I've been treated, and they have left. And a couple of them have gone back to the fetish scene. And so if we really want to advance, then we need to be tough on systems and kind on people. So be as ruthless as you damn well please with the regressive beauty industry and how they're like, oh, remove every single piece of hair on your face forever. And you must look like a 12-year-old. Like this kind of stuff. Yeah, toxic as fuck. Criticize it. But if a woman is coming in and she just looks different to you, why are you then going, why are you wearing lipstick? Why are you dressed like that? What do you do? What do you think you're doing? Like, yeah, great fucking welcome to someone who's, likely new to the fight and wants to understand it. And also this is why kind of more kind of radical cults have a tendency to draw people in, because they start off being charming and personable. There's something that we can potentially learn. It's like if there's a woman here who is unsure, who's left the BDSM scene or who is just new, I'm not telling people just to shut up and be kind. You should always question. But I do think a bit of sisterhood goes a long damn way. And I think, making women feel welcome in the fight is actually part of the work. You don't have to, go on, sorry, you were going to say, Mia, sorry.
Well, I've had something of a similar experience. I like the way my screen is set up. It's Stella, then me, and then you, Victoria. We've got the spectrum of makeup from no makeup to I'm somewhere in the middle, and then there's you. That's the way I'm seeing it. But I've had something of a similar experience in the early days of being in TERF Twitter. When calling myself a TERF, I had a section of RadFem Twitter tell me that I couldn't actually call myself a TERF because I wore makeup. And my mind was blown by it, but that was taking it literally. Yeah. Of course, nobody actually takes TERF literally and thinks everyone's a RadFem, but it was fascinating. And then a similar experience because I tweeted about my decade as a stay-at-home mother and experienced an enormous pile-on from RadFem Twitter that I was some sort of traitor to feminism because I had chosen to stay home, and when my husband starts abusing me and leaves me, I'll be destitute. It was a very strange experience. But the color, like, you look fabulous. I met you in London and I was so jealous of your makeup skills, and you did promise to give me makeup application classes next time we get together. 100%. You look amazing, but
that's very kind.
Great. I look forward to it. But we talked before we hit record about this. There's now, so the trans movement has set something in motion where, and I feel this impulse in myself, where if you come across, for me, it's not women, it's men. If I come across a man wearing makeup and he has long hair, I feel an instant reaction to him now that in the past I would have thought, oh, cool, he looks great. Like Eddie Izzard, I was a big fan of Eddie Izzard back in the day. But now I have this reaction to it. It's a very negative reaction because of what the trans movement has done to me. And you made a really interesting point about the danger of where this could go. Could you tell us?
Yeah, sure. So I think there's two strands of GC at the moment, which is gender critical, and that's kind of morphing and evolving. And some people don't even use the term gender critical anymore. And then they say sex realist, or I'm just a realist. And then there's gender conservatism. And the gender conservatism is the near reinforcement of rigid gender roles where men need to look a certain way and women need to look a certain way. But if you do that, that sets up trans 2.0, because then the women who are gender non-conforming and the men who are gender non-conforming then go, oh, I'm meant to look like this. These other guys tell me I don't have to look like this, so I'm going to go over there. So first of all, it sets up trans 2.0. And then secondly, the aesthetic policing on this side, where there is kind of ruthless criticizing of what people are wearing and seeing them as anyone who's a bit different is de facto queer, that's led to actual violence against gender non-conforming lesbians, where they've been beaten in the street because, you know, it's basically managed to reinvent queer bashing. So, and that is not a way forward for a humane society. You know, you should be able to, you know, make room for just aesthetic difference, because it should just be that, you know, some people are a little bit more flamboyant than others, and the behavior is called peacocking, where you just like looking a bit fabulous, and it's okay. But
I like that.
Yeah, okay. It's like, yeah. I think it's lovely. And I also think as well, I understand I'm not going to, you know, denigrate or dismiss women's gut reaction when they're, you know, encountering a guy in makeup, because obviously we've seen what's happened where there's been attacks against women for, you know, their beliefs, you know, where there's been really kind of nasty stuff spouted all over the internet. Of course, there's going to be a visceral reaction because women feel like they're in danger. I'm not going to, you know, denigrate that. But the sad thing is I understand where that comes from, but at the same time, just because a guy likes wearing, you know, having long hair and wearing makeup, that doesn't automatically make him an AGP. He could just like a bit of non-conformity. So that gender non-conformity isn't automatically predatory AGP. It's just guys who like wearing makeup. Most of the time, they're just gay. And there's nothing wrong with being gay. And, you know, it's just part of it, you know, like some guys are a bit more effete. That's okay. And we should be able to have that that variance that makes a more humane society if you're able to have that variance. And I think there is this kind of actually ruthless tech bro culture now, which means anything that is different is automatically othered. And when that happens, when people are othered and they feel frightened, they'll stick together and they'll clump in groups for their survival. And that then makes fighting ideologies that are the basis of these groups even harder. And this is actually why being okay with non-conformity, and I'm not talking about predatory AGP, of course we need to, you know, address that elephant in the room, you know, especially after I've had this first-hand experience. I know how dangerous it can be, but we need to have space for just that non-conformity. And I hope we will get there. I really do, because I actually think being a civil society depends on that, depends on how much we are willing to tolerate and accept benevolent difference. And that to me genuinely is where diversity could be strength. So it doesn't have to be diversity is our strength, mantra, everything's fine. But it's just, you know, where you've got differences in life experience, differences in aesthetics, differences in, you know, analyzing things, then you can kind of come together and, you know, actually pool knowledge and resources and actually have a better way of doing things rather than being totally combative with each other. I also think as well, like social media has made us more combative. It's made us more short with each other. And that's actually been anathema to solving problems. So, you know, and also, especially with X, people will keep saying that X is a free speech platform. It's not. It's Elon's speech platform. It's what he wants to put out onto the platform. And if you say anything against Elon, then you can be throttled. And there's been journalists who've been booted off of X because they questioned Elon. And then also, he doesn't need to throttle your reach, right? Your reach could be automatically great, but it's like, I'm not going to give you much reach unless you give me money. And he doesn't need to do that. It could just be as is, but he wants to do these tiers to get more cash for himself. So your reach is automatically throttled. Also, in terms of harassment, pile-ons, things like that, I don't think it's got particularly better for women under Elon, because, you know, I've had pile-ons where there's been 100, 200 men, police, like basically saying, really disgusting stuff about me, and I was told nothing breached the rules. It doesn't seem like, it really doesn't seem the hospitable platform people believe it to be, unless you have a particular set of ideas that are okay in particular circles. So this idea of it being a free speech platform, I disagree with. And also, I don't believe absolute free speech can hypothetically exist anyway, because there'll always be the survival of the person with the biggest megaphone. So, and also, if you deregulate things, the guy with the bigger megaphone is going to get an even bigger megaphone. So how on earth is that ever going? It's not going to be evenly distributed speech. It's never going to be more equal. It's never going to be more egalitarian. Essentially what he's trying to do, it seems, is to create something that's like a pseudo libertarian ethos. But again, that's survival of the biggest bully, because who's going to have the most resources to get their point across? It's going to be the guy who's the biggest bully with the most stuff. So I just don't think it works as
a very, very interesting point. But I'm just conscious of time rolling on, and we're coming towards the end. And I really want to hear your thoughts, because you're clearly a deep thinker, and you've given a lot of analysis to different scenes. How do you think the detrans scene is? Now, Mia might have a question as well to finish up, but how do you think the detrans scene is, if you follow me? And, desisters, detrans, social detrans, medical detrans, that whole, scene, for want of a better phrase.
Yeah, I mean, I'm not in the scene proper, although I am, I'm on a couple of groups. I actually think that there's been a real crying shame that some of the detransitioners have swapped one cult for another. There hasn't really been any critical thinking. And so they've gone from, I've detransitioned to, this is my single issue, I'm voting for Trump, and I don't really care about the holistic cluster of stuff that's potentially around him. And if you do care about the holistic stuff around him that seems questionable, then you're suffering from Trump derangement syndrome. And so that essentially then closes off any possibility of you then questioning them. So they're still engaging in some ways in cult think and cult speak, and they found solidarity in that cult. And I'm not saying every single person who's ever voted for Trump is in a cult. I'm saying, based on the behavior I have seen with these detransitioners, it appears cult-like to me. And I think that's quite sad. I think as well, the detransitioner scene is quite scattered. There's still no real healthcare for the detransitioners. I think there needs to be, I actually think there needs to be a proper political lobbying group or focus group where detransitioners are actually properly heard. I haven't heard of anything happening on scale. I've heard of a couple being asked to consult or be in the room, but it needs to go further. It needs to go further because this isn't over. People keep saying, quote unquote, we're winning. There's going to be further retaliation, just as we saw at the LGB Alliance. That's a retaliation, the advancements that have been made. That's going to continue. And that's going to continue under Trump, and it's going to continue in the UK. So detransitioners, I think, need to have more of a platform. And I think as well, they need more specialist care. And I hope we can get to the point where that's set up, because I don't think just a basic peer support group is enough. I think we need to look at, again, the drivers behind why people wanted, beyond the social drivers, get to potentially the biological drivers and the biological vulnerabilities and the biopsychosocial stuff that has led to them wanting to transition in the first place. Because I do know of detransitioners who still suffer with what they would frame as gender dysphoria, which comes out in times of distress. And they don't have anyone else to talk to aside from other detransitioners. And that needs to change. And it has to change fast, because I don't see the conditions for detransitioners improving anytime soon, unless something like that is actually, like focus groups, proper care, actual healthcare is put in place. I just don't see it changing. I know that's a really sad thing to end on, but but it's true. And yeah, I think I think as well, there's also still detransitioning is difficult, and there will be women and men who are questioning. We need to find a compassionate, decent way for those who are questioning, who may be wanting to leave the trans train, we need a compassionate way for them to find their way back. And I understand completely the LGB drop the TQ phenomenon, but there will be lesbians and gays who are identifying as trans and queer. And when you frame it as an opposition, if they've already been groomed, they will have a tendency to stay with the people who groomed them. So we need to find a compassionate way to talk to them and encourage them to examine what they're feeling. I don't necessarily know what that is yet. I'm thinking about it, but I do see this gap. And I wonder about, what we can do in order to do that outreach and to just, have some therapeutic compassion for them. And that's missing as well.
That ties into what my last question was going to be, and that is, the whole time you've been on the scene has been LGBTQ. You won't have known the gay scene that I used to go to the gay village in Manchester with my friends who were lesbians. That was a very different scene. I like this framing where you don't like the separation. I understand why the need for the separation as well, why people want a separation. But if we're keeping those communities together, do you think just simply removing gender identity ideology, this anti-reality, anti-science ideology, and everyone can coexist somehow grounded in reality? Do you see that as a way forward?
That's a really interesting question. Thank you. I don't think it can be happy clappy. Why don't we just all get along unthinkingly? Because I think that time may have passed. But I do think I do think that's an optic thing as well, with how oppositional and visceral the LGB drop the TQ is. But I do think you're right in that if we tackle the ideology, and again, it's a tough on systems, kind on people approach, I do think there is a greater possibility of a success rate there when we don't have to be at each other's throats. The outliers will be the predatory AGPs because they want to hold on to trans and queer, and they want to hold on to that power. So it's finding those, I would call them nodes of predation. So finding where they are. So Redux do a really good job. And you did a fantastic job with the WPath files. But we need to find out more about, where, how they are operating. And also, just in terms of gender ideology, it clearly, obviously, like Jennifer Weilack's done bits about it linking to transhumanism, and transhumanism isn't going away either. So that's going to be the other element of the fight. So I think, yes, you're right, but we also need to understand where it's evolving and look further at how it's still influencing transhumanism and like the transhumanist ideal and manifesto, because there's a lot of money being pumped into that. And that's because essentially, if you look at a meme, if you look at an idea, you can see it as being pseudo alive. So if you then try and attack an idea, because you're impinging upon its survival, it's then going to mutate and jump ship. You can try and mutate an idea until it's less and less and less and less virulent. But also, nature abhors a vacuum. So if you then absolutely eradicate it from the board, something else will come in to take its place, and it's an arms race. So the best thing we can do, at least in my opinion, is again to just tackle the ideology and just, take its teeth out and go, well, there's literally nothing here that's of any benefit to anybody, and so why would you want to spread it in the first place? Because I can't see any benefit. If it's causing women to dissociate from their sex bodies, if it's causing pain and suffering to women in rape crisis centres, if the women in the Lesh League have men wanting to breastfeed, if you have gay men who've then been left without penises like Richie, I mean, the end result is that there is just suffering. And if we can demonstrate that and use not just, reason and logic and, obviously the research and science that we have, but also appeal to people's humanity and emotion and go, look what it's done to these people. Then people can go, oh, no, wait, actually, yeah, you're right. There's a problem here. And I think there's a problem here with the dehumanization and the othering of people who have detransitioned. Because the second you are out of the trans train, you are other, you are nobody, you are just scum. And we need to rehumanize them and go, they are full human beings who've gone through a lot of trauma and pain and suffering, and this is the end result. And so you don't have to acquiesce and fawn and be kind, but, have some compassion for where they've actually, where they've come from, and just try and rehumanize them,
Thank you, Victoria. Before we finish, you're inspiration. You really are. I'm so glad you've come on. I think it would be remiss if I didn't ask before we finish, especially for those of us who are watching. I want to know about the pig sign and the plastic bush.
Yeah. Okay. Right. Yes. Okay. This is my big fucking bush, right? So every lesbian needs one. And so when I came out, everyone was like, get rid of body hair. Not get rid of body hair. What's the thing? Grow your body hair. You shouldn't have a shaved bush. You big fuck off bush. So I'm like, here's my big fuck off bush. And this is actually part of my disco closet as well. So there's actually a disco ball and LED lights and stuff. And when I've had enough of the world, I just come in here and just dance and just tell the world to fuck off. And I can tell people to fuck off with my big fuck off bush. So there we go. That's the story. This is an entire wall, people. This is a wall of mega bush. So yeah, and it's my pride and joy. And yes, there we go. That's the story of my big fuck off bush.
That's a great place to end.
Thank you very much.
Thank you, Victoria.
You're so welcome. And if you guys want to find me anywhere, I'm at thatvictoriag.substack.com. And I'm also starting the world's first conference for cancelled female and feminist artists from across the political spectrum. And that includes detransitioners. It's called Women Create.
Yay!
It's on the 30th to the 31st of May in London. And I would love for you both to come along. And if you know any detransitioned female artists who've been cancelled and actually need a space, then please spread the word. They would be very, very welcome. So that's where you can find me, and hopefully we can kind of bring people along and, get the party started. Yes, and it's womencreate.co.uk.
Yeah, well, wherever you are is where the party is, I'd say. Okay, thank you very much.
Thank you.
Thank you so much. Okay, take care. Bye-bye.